All right, well, welcome. This is Mike Lopez with On Point Preparedness, and today we have a very important topic to talk with you about. And on the surface, it's something that we're all pretty much aware about, and that is the chronic record cold temperatures that have been sweeping the nation over the past 2 years. But what you may not know is that the cold temperatures are really only the tip of the iceberg. And if we really want to look deep into this, there is something much, much more significant on the horizon. And who better to talk to us about this topic is none other than John L. Casey. He is a scientist who is leading the global climate community on cold weather change. John, it's great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be here.
So I'll tell you what, I have to refer to my clipboard here because you have a very impressive list of accreditations and achievements. I just want to go through this real quick. You are the president of the Space and Science Research Corporation. You're the chairman and CEO of the International Earthquake and Volcano Prediction Center. You are or were the former White House Space Program Advisor for the Bush Senior and Bush Junior administrations. You're the author of the book Cold Sun, which I've purchased, really great book. And you also have a new book coming out, which I believe was released in September, called Dark Winter. You're the editor of the Global Climate Status Report. It's produced by the world's leading scientists, and the best part is the only authoritative, non-government sponsored climate report published in the USA every 6 months. And lastly, you're the founder of the Global Cooling Awareness Project. It's a petition among those in the scientific community for those that believe in cold weather climate change. Well, I'll tell you what, I've been following the news for about the past 2 years. Drudge Report, CNN, RT, Fox News, InfoWars, you name it. And in singularity, they've all been talking about all these major record cold temperatures. As many of the viewers will know, we had the polar vortex last winter. We had what was called the poor man's polar vortex of the summer, where it was July and we were having temperatures, into the mid 50s in Ohio. We've had some freak snows in September. I know some of the northern states got some September snow. We've had record cold temperatures, as I've just said previously, record snowfalls. But this really isn't just limited to the cold temperatures. What we're also seeing is some pretty significant earthquake and volcanic activity. And, just for starters, for earthquakes, we've had the Indonesian tsunami. There was the tsunami that caused the Fukushima incident. We had the earthquake that caused Haiti. And then most recently, a lot of viewers will know we had the earthquake in Napa, which was pretty unexpected. And then on the volcano side, there's been 2 pretty big volcanic eruptions, one in Iceland that was pretty massive, and then the second one was in Indonesia, and it was so massive that it actually grounded, several flights. And so, I've been following you for about, over a year now. I think it was summer of 2013. And the common theme that I'm reading along all these headlines is scientists puzzled, scientists bewildered. They can't put together the pieces of cold weather, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. And all the while, after reading your book and reading your research, I'm like, John knows the answer. So I really wanted to get you on to talk to my viewers. And for the people that really aren't aware of what's going on, I was hoping you could do, sort of like a 101 on your research with cold climate, what's causing it, and where we're headed.
Thank you, Michael. I guess we have to step back a little and recognize that for the last 20-some years, we've been going down a path that says that mankind actually controls climate. And he does so by emitting CO2 gas as part of industrial greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, the UN, the US under President Obama have been eager to control industry and industrial output on this plan of helping the environment by shutting down CO2 emissions. That has been the main theme for many of the world's governments for the better part of 3 decades. We now know after $30 billion and 3 decades of research that, in fact, mankind's CO2 has very little to do with climate change. And what we have also found out is that it has always been the sun that's controlling the climate. And now that the sun is changing fundamentally in its energy output by which it warms us, going from a warming to a cooling period, we also find there are other effects tied to these transitions of the sun when it goes from global warming to global cooling.
And so, for the readers that don't know this, and please enlighten us, the sun goes through more than just one cycle. And one of the cycles that I'm aware of is this 13-year cycle. And, as I referred to, there were scientists that said they were bewildered or confused because in that 13-year solar cycle, we were supposed to be at a solar max. We were supposed to see a lot of sunspots or a lot of sun radiation, and there really wasn't that much. But you had predicted this.
That's correct. Back in 2007, I had predicted that the solar cycle number 24 that we're going through now would have only a certain limited energy output. I discussed that with NASA's top solar physicists and indicated to them at that time that their calculations were 100% off in effect, and that the energy output they were predicted based on sunspot count was, again, almost double what my math had shown. History now shows us, and current events show us, that in fact the sun did go into a very reduced energy output phase for the current solar cycle. It's running over 11 years for sure. The average is 11 for solar cycles, which we learned back in high school, but this one's gotten quite long. And when they get long, they get fairly low in energy output as well. So bottom line is the energy output for this solar cycle has been a big surprise to everyone in the federal government, but not at all really that much of a surprise for those of us who follow solar activity on long-range cycle behavior. Let me go back to this 11-year solar cycle. Most people are aware of that, but most people are certainly not aware of more powerful cycles. There's a 60-year cycle, there's a 90 to 100-year cycle, and the one that we're facing right now is a 206-year-long solar cycle. That is a very powerful cycle, and it's the one that's now has already ended global warming and has now started a new global cooling or cold climate phase.
And that's what I pretty much alluded to in the intro is, something really significant is on the horizon. You're talking about this 200 some year solar cycle and the implications of that. And, in reading your book and watching some of your other previous YouTube presentations, you talked about how this has been in history before. We've seen this. It's been documented. I think it was called the year without a summer. There was a period where the sun went into hibernation. I think it was called the Dalton Minimum. Is that correct?
That's correct. The last time the 206-year solar cycle was in cold phase was right after the 1800s. The actual period, we call it the Dalton Minimum, but it was roughly from 1793 to 1830. We were still coming out of the Little Ice Age at that point, which is an even longer cycle, but the 206-year cycle took what little warming we had at that time and sent us right back into a cold era. And also during that time, we had a major volcanic eruption and the largest earthquakes in U.S. history. And as a result, when the dust from the volcano struck back in 1816, we did in fact have a year without a summer. We had snow in the middle of August. The crops that had already been heavily damaged by the cold that survived were wiped out in August. So it was a very difficult time. And we're forecasting a similar, very difficult agricultural period going forward with more earthquakes, record volcanic eruptions, and deep cold, which will really devastate the planet's agricultural systems, not just here in the U.S., but worldwide.
And that's what really concerns me when I first started following your research, because back in the late 1700s, 1800s, I'm absolutely positive that people were way more self-sufficient than they are today. I mean, what you have today is centralization. And with centralization, it's almost as if any link in the chain that's broken means it's broken for everyone. I mean, do you agree with that?
I would, and there are a number of fundamental reasons for it. Number one, when the last solar hibernation, as we call it, these cold eras came around 206 years ago, we had only 1 billion people on the planet. And even here in the United States, there were only 5 million citizens, not including Native Americans. So we were a vastly different country back then. And the vast majority of those people were farmers. They raised their own food. They took care of themselves. There was no government assistance whatsoever. And so when tough times came along, they chopped wood for their fire and they stored and smoked food and fed themselves. So right now, what we find out is that I believe since 2007, 2008, more people now live in urban areas and are totally dependent on either the government or the food distribution system and have no means whatsoever to grow their own food. And that's on top of the other ill effects of the cold, which is, of course, people being affected by the cold, power losses which will occur during the cold. And one of the big collateral effects, of course, is social upheaval, food riots, warfare. These are very difficult times when we go into a solar hibernation or a deep cold era.
So, John, I just want to take the conversation back just a little bit so that the viewers can better understand the relationship between the cold climate and earthquakes and volcanoes. And really, the best way that I can think about it for myself is anytime you take a material and you put it through intense heating or cooling, that obviously puts a lot of strain on that material and it tends to break or fracture. And so when I think about the global warming we went through, and then we go through the global cooling, that puts a lot of stress on the tectonic plates, which then yields, the earthquakes and volcanoes we're experiencing. And actually, in one article, I saw that in 2014, they said the number of high magnitude earthquakes had actually doubled. But of course, they said there's no scientific correlation between them, but I think he would say otherwise.
Absolutely, I'll say otherwise. The research that I did myself has been corroborated by very highly qualified seismic experts worldwide. And then again, through our International Earthquake and Volcano Prediction Center, a number of papers have been developed. One of which, a very good one, was published in our most recent Global Climate Status Report, which you can get online at the spaceandscience.net, which is the website for our Space and Science Research Corporation. In that, we see a track record of major tectonic activity, showing the very strong correlation between these cold eras, these solar hibernations, and the worst earthquakes and worst volcanoes. So there is now a lot of data that shows they're correlated. And if I can go back to your comment, because most of the research money these days has been sucked up by man-made global warming research, which I consider a vast waste, we have very little money to go study things that really are happening and really can show correlations. Not only is there a 90% correlation between these solar hibernations and cold eras, but we also see a very strong correlation in the high 80s plus for these major earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, record volcanic eruptions at the same time. And so we don't have many to go research, but a couple of the theories, one of which you've touched on, is that we now are seeing the Earth's mantle cooling rapidly, and therefore it's like stepping on the brakes on your car after you've been going very fast. All of a sudden everyone gets thrown forward. There are a lot of dynamic forces that are shifting gears, if you will. Another one is that with the last 200 years of the mantle being warmed up a lot, before this new cold era has begun, we've seen the mantle more viscous, more fluid, moving faster, and so that may have simply built up pressures that are being released. Either theory could be correct, and it could be another third theory is even more accurate, but we just don't have time nor money to go look at it. I wish we did.
So, John, I wanted to get your overall opinion on preparedness because, when people watch the news today, they see the world fraying apart at the seams. You have Ebola spreading all across the world. You have ISIS growing every day and their wish to destroy America. Our border is as porous as a sieve. You have a new Cold War between Russia and the United States. You have civil wars breaking out almost, once a quarter here throughout all these different countries. And it's almost as if there's a
Right.
fatigue with the doom and gloom news. So, for you trying to convince people about the coming cold era and the necessity to prepare, how do you get that message across to these people who are already overwhelmed by all this other bad news?
A good question. The regrettable aspect of climate change is it takes a long time to change. We're talking many years and decades, as opposed to weather, which changes frequently and year to year, even on major scale. But if you look at uh, what we can expect, if we go back and look at history, we'll have a pretty good idea what to expect and when. Usually we see that these new cold eras uh, are fairly dramatic. When they do start to get cold, they get cold fairly quick and fairly steep in terms of temperature drop. Right now, we're looking at fairly substantial record cold uh, beginning in a year and through the 2020s. The late 2020s and the 2030s will be the worst. Mathematically, the bottom of the cold era will be 2031, according to my research, but others say it could be either side of that. The bottom line is that we will see the most difficult period of time once the crops start to get damaged. We've had a record crop in corn, wheat, and soybeans pretty much, certainly in corn this year. We're basking in the remaining warmth that we've had as the solar cycle 14 passes its peak of heating, and we expect to drop off very rapidly here in the next few years. And then within 5 or 6 years, we'll be at a point where we'll be able to forecast whether the Dalton class of minimum, which we have predicted, is going to come around, or even worse, what the Russians are saying, that a little ice age will begin in the next 11-year solar cycle. Either will be very difficult times because we're going to get crop damage, people won't have enough food, and again, go back and look at history. Go study the last period of time. Read Cold Sun or read Dark Winter or other books on the market, and there are several good ones that describe what happened during the last period of the early 1800s. Um, but it's going to take the first big shock of a major crop damage before people really take this seriously. We can withstand brutal winters if we have cold and all of our power grid operating. But once we start to lose food and crops, either at the harvest time or in spring planting, which I think is the more challenging period, then things get serious and people stand up and take notice.
Well, John, based on our discussion, with the coming cold era to last over a decade plus, we're really in this for the long haul. So what are you doing yourself, and what are you telling your friends, families, and supporters to do in terms of preparedness?
Well, I tell them what I tell all of the people I speak to. I've given many, many, many conferences and radio interviews, and the message is always the same. First off, go study history. Learn from those who've written about it, know what to expect. Then go ahead and get at least a 1 year food supply on hand so that you're not impacted by the initial panic that will come when the USDA says we've lost 30% or 50% of our corn and wheat crop, for example. Uh, most grocery stores have only a 3 day supply, and unfortunately, I suspect when the first panic hits, those store shelves will be bare fairly quick. So don't let yourself get caught up in that initial panic, um, because we will have very devastating cold years where crops are damaged heavily, but then we'll have a good year. So set aside something for the bad years and take the good years when you get them. Second thing is be prepared to defend your food supply. If we go back again and look at history, we find that the last time this hit, people were robbed, they were killed, or stores were robbed. Food trains on the way from the granaries to the cities were robbed. This can be a very difficult time, of course, when you have people trying to get food. And now, since so many people are dependent on the U.S. government for food, period, much less the fact that we've got so many people in urban areas now, this can be an even worse effect than it was the last time. The third thing is, look to your neighbors, your friends. Are they prepared? Anticipate what may happen. Down here in Florida is a good example. We've been through many hurricane seasons in the past, though not many recently, but especially during the 2004, 5, and 6 years, we had lots of hurricanes. It taught Floridians and many people living on the Gulf and Atlantic coast how to prepare for not having food or water or gasoline for a week, 2 weeks, or longer. That's just the kind of thing people need to get used to on a national scale, not just on a regional scale because of hurricanes. Because when these effects start, they are global effects. It affects every nation, and we need to recognize that our life will be different in the next 30 years for sure.
Well, again, John, thank you for coming on the show. And to all the viewers who find this video, do heed John's overall message and warning about the coming cold climate. As John previously mentioned, do educate yourself. A great way to start is through John's book, Cold Sun. I found it to be a fantastic read. He also has his book, Dark Winter, released this September. I'm sure it'll be just as good as the first. And also you can download his Global Climate Status Report online. The links are in the bottom description of the YouTube. And always, thank you for donations and support for On Point Preparedness.
Thank you, Mike.